Have you ever felt the wind suddenly shift and thought, just for a second, that something alive was moving through the air around you? That instinct connects you to thousands of years of human experience. Understanding where these feelings come from helps us see how our ancestors made sense of the world. Let me introduce you to the Vila. These are female storm spirits from South Slavic mythology, woven deep into the fabric of cultures across Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. For centuries, people living in these regions believed these spirits controlled the wind, storms, and lightning that swept across their mountains and valleys. The name itself tells us something important. Vila comes from an old Slavic root meaning to twist or to wind. When you watch a storm approaching, clouds twist into dark spirals, wind winds through trees, rain spins in sheets across the landscape. The very name captures the movement of weather itself. These weren't recent stories. The earliest mentions of Vile appear in pre-Christian oral folklore, passed down through epic poetry and songs. We're talking about beliefs that predate organized religion in these regions. Where did people think the Vila lived? Mountains where storms seemed to gather, dense forests where shadows moved, inside the clouds themselves, near remote lakes and deep caves. Every one of these places is somewhere humans felt small, somewhere nature's power was obvious. In traditional belief, a sudden gust of wind wasn't just weather, it was a sign. A violent tempest wasn't just atmospheric pressure, it was the presence of the vile made manifest. Every storm had meaning, had intention behind it. This way of thinking comes from animism, the belief that natural forces have spirits or consciousness. Rivers aren't just water, they're living things with moods. Mountains aren't just rock, they're beings that watch and remember. The Balkans shaped these beliefs. This is a region of dramatic mountains, deep valleys, and spectacular storms. The Dinaric Alps create perfect conditions for violent weather. Mediterranean air masses crash into continental systems, producing lightning, wind, and rain that can feel overwhelming. Living there centuries ago without weather forecasts, you'd develop stories to make sense of it all. When Christianity arrived, it didn't erase the Vila from people's minds. Churches were built, priests taught new doctrines, but in the villages, people kept telling stories about the Vila. They kept following the old customs, kept teaching their children the rules. The mythology continued in folk culture. These beliefs persisted because they served a real purpose. They were a framework for understanding dangerous weather, a code of conduct for living in harmony with a powerful environment, and a way to feel some control. Consider a farmer in medieval Serbia, watching dark clouds build over the mountains. You had no meteorologist, but you had the Vila stories. You knew that if you'd been respectful, if you'd followed the customs, maybe the storm would pass gently. That's a psychological tool for coping with uncertainty. These myths arose in communities where survival depended on reading nature carefully. The Vila stories encoded that attentiveness. If you believe a spirit watches when you enter a forest during a storm, you're going to be more careful and observant. So we have these powerful storm spirits deeply embedded in South Slavic culture, representing the raw power of weather. They've survived centuries because they served real functions for communities living in a challenging environment. Now, where did these spirits actually come from? For the people who believed in the Vila, power came from the sky every time lightning split the darkness. Their origin story shows how pre-scientific cultures observed nature's patterns and wove them into narratives. In folklore, a Vila's birth was tied directly to lightning. When lightning struck a tree, a lake, or a mountaintop, that's when a Vila came into being. A bolt of electricity searing down from the clouds. In the aftermath, something new existed, a spirit. Different strikes in different places created different kinds of spirits, each associated with the element they emerged from. The mountain Vile, called Planinske, were born when lightning struck the high peaks. They controlled wind, snow, and avalanches. Mountains are where weather is most extreme. Wind accelerates over ridges, snow slides, storms gather around peaks. The mountain Vila embodied the fierce nature of alpine weather. The forest Vile, the Shumske, emerged when lightning hit trees. Their domain was rain and vegetation. Forests are where lightning strikes are common. Tall trees act as natural lightning rods. The forest Vila made sense of that connection between lightning, water, and growth. The water Vile, known as Vodine, were born when lightning struck rivers, lakes, or springs. They controlled water in all its forms, flowing rivers, building storms, devastating floods. People had specific signs of their presence. Whirlwinds were considered the Vila's dance. People avoided walking through them. This wasn't arbitrary. Walking through a strong whirlwind can be dangerous. Debris gets caught in the rotation. You could be knocked down or injured. The folklore created a safety rule disguised as spiritual respect. Offerings were central to relating to the Vila. People would leave bread, milk, or honey near trees and springs. This creates rituals that bring people regularly to important natural features. It makes you pay attention, notice changes, maintain a relationship with the landscape. In Bulgarian folklore, spirits called samodivi share almost identical characteristics with the Vila. This suggests a common regional origin, a shared way of understanding weather and nature. The Dinaric Alps experience some of the highest frequencies of electrical storms in Europe. Spectacular displays of lightning, often multiple times per week during certain seasons. Living there 1,000 years ago, seeing lightning constantly, you develop elaborate beliefs about what causes it. What we're looking at is early meteorology disguised as mythology. The Vila represented an attempt to categorize different types of weather phenomena. Mountain storms differ from forest storms differ from storms over water. By creating 3 types of Vila, the folklore was creating categories for understanding weather variation. Pre-scientific societies weren't ignorant. Their observations were often remarkably accurate. Lightning does create chemical changes. High mountains do have different weather than valleys. Forests do moderate rainfall. The Vila myths encoded observed reality into a narrative framework. The Vila weren't just made-up beings. They were personifications of observed natural patterns, attempts to give form to forces that were powerful but impossible to control or predict. These spirits had to look like something. Their appearance becomes both beautiful and cautious. Nature's deadliest forces often come wrapped in beauty. The Vila embodied this paradox. Understanding how they were described helps us see how these cultures thought about nature itself. Alluring and deadly if approached carelessly. The Vila were described as impossibly beautiful women, tall figures with pale, luminous skin that seemed to glow. Their hair was golden or silver, catching light like metal. They wore shining white gowns. Every description emphasizes something that gleams, something that catches the eye. Their clothing wasn't made of ordinary fabric. The stories say their garments were woven from mist, moonlight, or spider silk. These materials are gossamer, translucent, things you can barely touch. What the folklore describes is the way air and light and moisture look in certain conditions. They wore the atmosphere itself. The Vila were often depicted riding clouds or mounted on deer or white horses. Clouds move with the wind, shifting and reforming. Deer are alert and fast. here one moment and gone the next. Each association reinforces that the Vila are mobile, untethered, impossible to capture. One persistent story involves seeing them bathe. They bathed in mountain springs or lakes at dawn or midnight. The warning: watching a Vila bathe was considered fatal. Witnesses could be struck blind, paralyzed, or drop dead. This warning represents something practical. Mountain springs and lakes at dawn or midnight are dangerous places. The terrain is rocky and slippery. Visibility is poor. Temperature differences create mists that distort perception. The folklore created a safety rule through supernatural threat. There's something deeper too. The idea that beauty can be fatal reflects a sophisticated understanding of nature's dual character. The most beautiful storms are often the most destructive. A perfect spring day in the mountains can turn into a blizzard within hours. The folklore consistently warned against following or approaching the Vila. Men who see a beautiful figure in white, who hear singing, who follow the sound deeper into the forest never return. The message: when nature calls, when something beautiful lures you away from safety, resist. This reflects reality. People did get lost in forests. They did wander away and die of exposure. By creating a narrative about seductive spirits who lead people astray, the folklore provided explanation and warning. Their physical perfection symbolized the power and unpredictability of storms. A powerful storm system rolling in often looks magnificent. The clouds stack dramatically. Light plays through them. The wind picks up. Then it hits, and that same system destroys homes and flattens crops. The Vila's appearance works the same way. Beautiful at a distance, deadly up close. In a culture where survival depended on reading natural signs correctly, you needed healthy respect for danger. But humans are curious, attracted to beauty. The Vila stories address this directly. Beauty is a warning, not an invitation. The Vila's dual nature reflects how humans experience the sublime in nature. That mix of awe and fear, watching a powerful storm approach. That combination of wanting to watch and knowing you should seek shelter. That's what the Vila embodies. So we have spirits of impossible beauty, whose attractiveness is a form of threat. But they also had expectations, rules they demanded humans follow. The Vila folklore provided a detailed answer for how to live safely in a dangerous world. The stories laid out specific rules for coexisting with them. These weren't suggestions, they were laws. Understanding these rules shows how mythology functioned as practical code of conduct. Never whistle or sing at night, especially outdoors, especially alone. The explanation: whistling or singing attracts the Vila's attention, and bad things follow. The practical reality: at night without electric lights, visibility was almost nothing. Being quiet means being alert to sounds around you. Whistling masks other noises, approaching animals, changing weather, people who might need help or mean harm. A person walking silently hears more, stays more connected to their environment. Second law: do not answer when you hear your name called in the wind. You hear your name crystal clear. The natural impulse is to answer, to turn. The folklore says don't. That's a Vila testing you, and if you answer, you're lost. Wind does create sounds that mimic voices. The way air moves through terrain generates tones and patterns that our brains interpret as speech. By making it taboo to respond, the folklore prevented people from wandering away while chasing auditory illusions. Third law: avoid circular patches of flattened grass. These were believed to be Vila dance rings. Step inside one, and you might be cursed with illness or death. What creates circular patches? Fungal growth, whirlwinds, animal gathering spots. Some indicate conditions worth avoiding. Certain fungi are toxic. By marking these circles as dangerous, the folklore encouraged people to avoid them. Fourth law: stay away from lakes, trees, and caves during storms. This is presented as respect for the Vila's homes. The meteorological reality: these are exactly the places you don't want to be. Lakes are dangerous in lightning because water conducts electricity. Trees are natural lightning rods. Caves can flood rapidly. Every prohibited location is genuinely hazardous during electrical weather. Beyond prohibitions, there was a culture of offerings. People would leave bread, milk, or honey at significant natural sites. The act created regular interaction with important landscape features. You'd notice changes in weather, water levels, animal activity. Breaking these customs carried serious consequences. The Vila would send whirlwinds to destroy your home, hail to ruin your harvest, mysterious illnesses. These were real disasters that happened. By attributing them to Vila punishment, the folklore provided explanations and a sense that actions could prevent recurrence. Ethnographic studies from the 19th century found that some villages still followed these customs as genuine practice. The rules remained functional cultural knowledge, passed from generation to generation. These rules functioned as early codes of environmental respect. They established boundaries. Certain places are off limits, especially at certain times. Nature has claims that supersede human convenience. This worldview created a different relationship with landscape than one that saw nature as something to be conquered. The Vila laws also promoted social cohesion. Everyone followed the same rules. If someone got into trouble, the community had a shared framework for understanding why. These laws represent an attempt to assert agency, to create a contract with natural forces. If I follow these rules, I will be safer. It's negotiation, relationship, careful management of human behavior to align with observed natural patterns. So these spirits demanded specific behaviors and promised terrible consequences for violation. Yet they were not only destroyers. Sometimes the Vila chose favorites. In medieval South Slavic epic poetry, the spirits that destroyed the careless sometimes chose specific individuals to raise and train. This aspect reveals how these cultures thought about exceptional ability, about the price of power, and about the line between blessing and curse. The epic poems are filled with heroes who had supernatural origins. Many were said to have been raised by Vila. The most famous is Miloš Obilić, a legendary Serbian knight. According to tradition, a Vila found him as a child, took him to a mountain home, and raised him away from human society. She taught him combat, strategy, courage, and gave him superhuman strength. A child removed from ordinary life, trained in isolation by a powerful teacher, emerges as an extraordinary warrior. This narrative pattern appears in many cultures because exceptional ability needs explanation. Supernatural training provides that explanation. The Vila were incredibly demanding teachers. They trained their chosen ones in forests and mountains, far from civilization. The training was brutal. The heroes who emerged had supernatural strength, speed, and resilience that allowed them to survive wounds that would kill normal men. This training wasn't freely given and came with strict conditions. The Vila demanded absolute obedience. A warrior trained by a Vila owed her loyalty. Break that bond, show arrogance, and the Vila would withdraw her favor. Sometimes she'd curse the warrior, strip away all the gifts. The hero who fell from Vila favor often died soon after. This conditional nature is crucial. Even the mightiest warrior remained subordinate to the Vila who trained him. His power came from a source beyond himself, a source that could be revoked instantly. The Vila also appeared at battlefields, not to fight directly, but to influence outcomes. They might appear before battle, giving warnings. Crucially, they appeared after battles to mourn the dead. By making the Vila mourners of warriors, the folklore connected war dead to the honored dead, to the landscape itself through the spirits that inhabited it. The connection between weather and war becomes explicit in the mythology. Storms were seen as signs of divine intervention in battles. A storm that struck the enemy was the Vila helping. A storm that scattered your own forces meant you'd lost their favor. The relationship between Vila and warriors also encoded something about the warrior's social role. Warriors are necessary for defense, but dangerous to internal peace. They're honored, but also feared. By making warriors specially connected to the Vila, the folklore marked them as liminal figures. The unpredictability of Vila's favor mirrors the unpredictability of battle itself. You can train, prepare, follow all the rules, and still lose. By attributing battle results partially to Vila intervention, the folklore acknowledged this reality. The stories also dealt with what happens when a warrior becomes too proud. A hero achieves great victories, pride follows. He forgets the Vila who trained him, stops making offerings, speaks arrogantly. Then disaster. Vila destroys him. These cautionary tales warned against arrogance, against forgetting obligations. In a warrior culture where physical prowess could easily translate to social domination, these stories provided a check. The Vila's role as both helper and punisher reflects the fundamental unpredictability of nature. Nature provides rain for crops but also destroys it with floods and storms. You can't have one without the potential for the other. Yet strength and warfare weren't the only domains where the Vila exercised power. Their influence extended into something more subtle, the realm of sound itself, beyond physical power and the ability to unleash storms. The Vila possessed voices of extraordinary power, voices that could literally alter the natural world. This aspect reveals how sound, music, and breath were woven into the fabric of weather mythology. In folklore, the Vila's singing voices were called Vilinglas. These weren't ordinary voices. Their songs could control wind, summon rain, or calm raging storms. When a Vila sang, the natural world listened and responded. Before meteorology, people noticed patterns between atmospheric conditions and sound. Wind creates tones as it moves through terrain. Pressure changes affect how sound travels. Thunder is literally the voice of a storm. By personifying these acoustic phenomena as the Vila's voice, the folklore created a framework where sound and weather were intimately connected. Folk healers claimed special knowledge of Vila melodies. They said that imitating these songs could heal the sick or restore fertility. Whether or not the songs had actual medical effects, the practice served important functions. Healing rituals involving music created moments of focused attention, community support, and psychological comfort. Shepherds' flutes, instruments called frula, were directly inspired by the Vila's supposed voices. Certain Balkan musical scales and melodic patterns were said to echo the songs Vila sang. Musicians who mastered these scales were respected, even slightly feared, because they were touching something supernatural. The songs were said to cause emotional trance or altered states in listeners. People who heard Vila singing might stand frozen until the song ended. They might weep uncontrollably or feel overwhelming joy. These descriptions match what we know about the psychological effects of music, especially when people believe it has supernatural origins. In some tales, groups of vials sang together to create thunder and lightning. Multiple voices join in harmony, and as they reach a crescendo, the sky splits with electricity. This connects groups singing to the collective power of storms. It also reflects social reality. Group singing in these cultures was a community activity. By making the Vila group singers whose harmonies create storms, the mythology elevated communal music making to cosmic significance. Music connected humans to the unseen natural world through imitation of the Vila's sound. When a shepherd played his flute on a mountainside, he wasn't just entertaining himself. He was engaging in dialogue with the spirits of that place. The music was an offering, a method of communication. Their association with voice and air linked them symbolically to breath, wind, and life. Breathing is the most fundamental human action. Wind is air in motion. Voice is controlled breath shaped into meaning. The Vila embodied all of these. There's something profound about connecting voice to natural forces. It suggests that the world itself has a voice, that weather speaks, that listening carefully might reveal meaning in the wind. The Vila's voices also carried moral weight. They sang laments for the dead. They sang songs of warning before storms. They sang songs of anger when their rules were broken. The voice was never neutral. It always carried intention, emotion, purpose. So the Vila controlled not just the physical manifestations of weather, but its acoustic dimensions. They stormed and sang together, power made audible. Yet there was another layer to Vila's role. They didn't just control the weather and sing. They watched human behavior and responded to it. The Vila weren't neutral forces. They had opinions about human behavior, and they acted on those opinions with consequences that could transform lives or end them. Understanding their role as moral enforcers reveals how these spirits functioned as a cosmic justice system. In folklore, Vila acted as enforcers of moral balance. They punished greed, lies, and environmental disrespect. They rewarded kindness, courage, and humility. The stories follow consistent patterns about what behaviors draw Vila favor and what brings their wrath. Folktales told of shepherds rewarded for compassion and farmers cursed for selfishness. A shepherd who shared his food with a stranger might later find his flock protected from wolves or storms. A farmer who hoarded grain while neighbors starved might wake to find his fields destroyed by hail. The message: how you treat others matters. Acts of kindness toward animals or the land could earn Vila protection. Treating livestock gently, allowing fields to rest, protecting springs from contamination. These actions showed respect for the natural world. The Vila noticed and remembered. Conversely, the Vila targeted oath breakers and traitors with storms or fevers. Breaking a sworn promise, betraying someone who trusted you, stealing, these actions brought supernatural punishment. The punishment often fit the crime in symbolic ways. A liar might lose the ability to speak clearly. A thief might find that everything he stole brought him misfortune. The Vila rewarded truth, courage, and humility. A person who spoke honestly even when it cost them, who faced danger to help others, who remained modest despite success. These were the people Vila blessed. These stories promoted social and ecological ethics in rural communities. They provided clear models of good and bad behavior with supernatural enforcement. When parents taught children how to behave, they could point to Vila stories as proof that virtue matters. The Vila functioned as symbols of justice, tied to natural law rather than religion. They didn't care about theological correctness. They cared about how you treated the land, animals, other people, and whether you kept your word. Their justice was practical, focused on actions rather than beliefs. Consider the psychological effect of believing that nature itself judges your behavior. It creates accountability that goes beyond human witnesses. You might lie to your neighbor and get away with it, but the Vila saw. This belief system meant that even when alone, your actions mattered because the natural world was watching. The stories also address the problem of unjust human systems. Sometimes the local lord was corrupt, the laws favoured the powerful, and ordinary people had no recourse. But the Vila provided an alternative justice system. The rich man who stole land from peasants might escape human punishment, but a well-timed storm could level his manor. There's also something here about distributed authority. In societies where power was concentrated in the hands of a few, the Vila represented a check on that power. Even the king or the wealthiest landowner couldn't control the weather. The Vila might destroy a peasant's cottage or a nobleman's palace with equal ease if either violated the rules. The moral framework enforced by Vila stories also promoted long-term thinking. Greed might bring short-term gain, but Vila punishment would cost you more in the end. The mythology encouraged people to consider consequences beyond immediate benefit. So the Vila were moral arbiters as much as weather spirits. They enforced an ethical system based on respect, honesty, and environmental care. Yet no mythology remains static, especially when confronted with a new dominant religion. The Vila's story changed dramatically when Christianity established itself in the Balkans. When a new religion arrives, it doesn't simply erase what came before. The Vila's fate under Christianization reveals how pagan beliefs were reinterpreted, how the church attempted to control folklore, and how these ancient spirits nevertheless persisted. After Christianization, Vile were reinterpreted as fallen angels or demonic spirits. This transformation was deliberate and strategic. The church couldn't simply deny that people experienced what they attributed to Vila. Too many people believed, too many stories existed. Instead, church authorities provided a new explanation that fit Christian cosmology. Folklore claimed that during Lucifer's fall, some angels became trapped between heaven and earth, turning into Vile. This origin story preserved the supernatural status of these beings while reframing them as tragic or dangerous rather than natural forces to be respected. They were no longer spirits born from lightning and landscape. They were corrupted celestial beings. Church authorities discouraged belief in Vile and banned songs about them. Priests preached against the old customs, calling them superstitious and potentially heretical. The offerings left at trees and springs were declared pagan practices that offended God. Yet the church also recognized that simply forbidding these practices wouldn't work. People needed their rituals, so pagan rituals involving flowers, dances, and forest offerings were rebranded under Christian saints' days. The spring festivals where people honored the Vila became celebrations of particular saints. The offerings at springs were redirected toward chapels built near those same water sources. Priests performed blessings against whirlwinds believed to contain evil spirits. When a whirlwind approached, a priest might make the sign of the cross and recite prayers to dispel it. This practice acknowledged the phenomenon people feared while providing a Christian response. Despite official suppression, Vila-related rituals survived in rural areas through the 19th century. Ethnographers who travelled through the Balkans documented active belief in these spirits among peasant communities. Old women still warned children about dance rings. Farmers still left offerings. The two systems coexisted. Their transformation from divine to forbidden marked a shift in worldview from natural reverence to religious dualism. The older worldview saw nature as alive, powerful, demanding respect, but not inherently good or evil. The Christian framework introduced dualism: God versus Satan, heaven versus hell. The Vila were pushed toward the demonic side of this divide. The figure of the Vila remained culturally persistent, even when officially condemned. They appeared in folk songs that continued to be sung, in stories grandmothers told children, in warnings that shaped behavior. The word Vila itself remained in the language. The mythology went underground but didn't disappear. This persistence tells us something important about how deeply these beliefs were embedded in the culture. They weren't just intellectual propositions that could be argued away. They were woven into daily practice, into the way people understood their landscape, into the language itself. The tension between official religion and folk belief created interesting hybrid forms. Some stories featured Vila, who could be controlled by Christian symbols and prayers, incorporating them into a Christian universe while maintaining their distinct characteristics. What we see in this transformation is not the death of a mythology, but its adaptation and survival under hostile conditions. The Vila changed, lost some characteristics, gained new ones, but continued to matter. And that memory has proven remarkably durable. Even in the modern era, the Vila hasn't disappeared. Walk through the Balkans today and you'll find that the Vila, though no longer believed in literally by most people, remains present in culture, language, and artistic expression. Their modern survival shows us how ancient myths adapt to contemporary contexts. The Vila continues to appear in modern South Slavic literature, art, and popular culture. Contemporary authors often draw on Vila imagery when they want to evoke the region's distinctive cultural heritage. The Vila serves as a recognizable symbol of Balkan identity. Folk festivals in Serbia, Croatia, and Bulgaria still include Vilin dances. These aren't religious rituals anymore, but cultural performances that celebrate traditional heritage. Dancers wear white costumes reminiscent of the Vila's legendary appearance, and the choreography mimics the swirling, wind-like movements associated with these spirits. The term Vilin Vetter, meaning fairy wind, remains a common expression for sudden gusts. People use it naturally in conversation without thinking about its mythological origins. When a door slams from an unexpected breeze, someone might say it was the Vilin Vetter. The phrase has become an idiom, a piece of linguistic archaeology. Names derived from Vila are still in use. Violeta, Vilina, Vilma appear regularly in birth records across the region. Each person carrying such a name is keeping the mythology alive in a small way. Authors like Vuk Karadžić preserved oral Vila legends in 19th century ethnographic collections. Karadžić travelled through Serbian-speaking regions, writing down the epic poems and folk tales that had been passed orally for generations. These collections remain important cultural documents and sources for scholars studying Slavic mythology. The Vila has been reimagined in modern fantasy works as a protector, warrior, or elemental spirit. Fantasy authors looking for distinctive mythological figures often turn to less commonly known traditions like those of the Balkans. The Vila offers something different from the overused elves and fairies of Western European mythology. Songs and folk music in the Balkans continue to reference her as a symbol of beauty and danger. Traditional music performed at weddings and festivals often includes songs with Vila themes. The Vila has become a flexible symbol that can represent feminine power, nature's unpredictability, or national identity. The persistence of the Vila myth shows the endurance of pre-Christian traditions in modern identity. In regions where cultural identity has been contested, where empires and nations have risen and fallen, these ancient stories provide a sense of continuity. The Vila existed before the modern political divisions, before the religious conflicts, before the nation-states. There's also something appealing about the Vila to modern sensibilities. Contemporary environmental awareness makes the Vila's message about respecting nature and recognizing its power feel relevant again. The idea that natural forces demand respect, that environmental exploitation brings consequences, that humans must maintain balance with their surroundings resonates in an age of climate change. The Vila's combination of beauty and danger, power and vulnerability, also speaks to modern discussions about feminine archetypes. She's not a passive princess or a nurturing mother figure. She's powerful, independent, dangerous, and demands respect on her own terms. Tourist industries in the Balkans have also discovered the Vila. Mountain resorts and folk museums use Vila imagery in their branding. This commercialization is somewhat ironic, but it does keep the imagery circulating in public consciousness. Educational systems in these countries teach the Vila myths as part of cultural heritage curricula. Children learn these stories in school alongside history and literature. This ensures that even families who no longer maintain folk traditions are exposed to the mythology, so the Vila persists, not as active belief, but as cultural memory, artistic inspiration, linguistic fossil, and identity marker. The mythology has transformed from practical knowledge system to heritage preservation, from literal belief to symbolic resource. But there's one more layer to explore. What the Vila myth tells us about the relationship between human imagination and meteorological reality. The story of the Vila ultimately connects to something that hasn't changed: the weather itself. Understanding this connection brings us full circle, revealing how mythology emerges from environmental reality and how ancient patterns of thought encoded genuine scientific observations. The Balkan Peninsula experiences some of Europe's highest thunderstorm frequencies, especially in the Dinaric Alps. This is documented meteorological fact. The region sees spectacular electrical storms with remarkable regularity. During peak season, multiple thunderstorms per week are normal. The lightning displays can be intense, dramatic, and genuinely dangerous. Meteorological studies link this to the collision of Mediterranean and continental air masses. Warm, moist air from the Mediterranean moves inland and meets cooler, drier continental air. The temperature differences create instability. Add the mountainous topography, and you have perfect conditions for thunderstorm formation. The Vila legend reflects early attempts to explain these natural weather phenomena. Before atmospheric science, people still experienced the storms. They needed explanations. Why does lightning strike certain places repeatedly? Why do some valleys experience worse weather? The Vila provided answers that made sense within their worldview. Ancient societies used myth to understand unpredictable natural disasters. This wasn't a failure of intelligence. It was a necessary strategy for psychological survival. When you face forces powerful enough to destroy everything you've built, you need a framework for making sense of them. Mythology provided that framework. The Vila represents the dual nature of wind and storm, destructive yet essential for renewal. Storms bring devastation. They flatten crops, destroy buildings, kill livestock. But they also bring rain that sustains agriculture. They clear the air, cool oppressive heat, break droughts. The electrical activity affects soil chemistry in ways that benefit plant growth. The Vila's dual nature perfectly mirrors the actual role of storms in ecological systems. Their myth encodes respect for natural power, ecological balance, and the limits of human control. This might be the most important legacy of the Vila tradition. In an age when humans imagine they can control nature through technology, the Vila remind us of something we're relearning through climate change. Nature remains more powerful than we are. The survival of Vila lore demonstrates the endurance of ancient ecological understanding. These weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated observations about how weather works, how different terrains create different conditions, what behaviors reduce risk. The poetic language of mythology encoded practical knowledge about lightning safety, flood risks, wind patterns, and seasonal weather changes. In cultural memory, the Vila remains the spirit of the storm, invisible, powerful, and eternal. You can't see the wind, only its effects. You can't hold a storm, only experience its passage. You can't control the weather, only adapt to it. The Vila embodied all of this, standing in the Balkans today during a thunderstorm, watching lightning split the sky over ancient mountains, hearing thunder echo through valleys. You can understand why people created the Vila. The experience is primal, overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying. Something in the human mind wants to give that experience form. The Vila is the form that particular landscape and culture gave it. The mythology worked because it was rooted in accurate observation. The stories served practical purposes because they encoded genuine survival knowledge. The beliefs persisted because they addressed real psychological needs. The need for explanation, for agency, for relationship with forces beyond our control. Modern meteorology can explain everything the Vila once explained. We understand pressure systems, electrical discharge, all the physics and chemistry of storms. But knowing the mechanism doesn't necessarily change the experience. A storm is still overwhelming, still beautiful and dangerous. Perhaps what the Vila myth ultimately offers us is a different way of thinking about our relationship with nature, not as resources to exploit, but as forces to respect, patterns to observe, powers that demand humility. The Vila said, "You are small. Nature is vast. Pay attention. Follow the rules. Maintain balance, and you might survive." That message, stripped of its supernatural elements, remains scientifically and ecologically sound. The storms continue. The lightning still strikes the same mountains. The wind still whips through the same valleys, and somewhere in the cultural memory of the Balkans, in the folk songs and festivals, in the names and stories, the Vila endures. Not as literal belief, but as a pattern of thought about how humans might live in harmony with powerful natural forces. The storm that gave birth to this mythology is still breathing, and the lesson it taught remains worth remembering.